Welcome to Dying in Grace, a program designed to have us talk about all aspects of death and dying so that we can be comfortable with a topic that up to now has been taboo. My name is Arlene Stepputat, and I'll be your host. And each week, we bring somebody from the community that shares a unique experience, perspective, or experience about death and dying. This week, I'm happy to say that our guest is my dear friend, Judi Weisbart. Judi, I'm so happy that you're here at the program. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very happy you're here, and one of the things that's shaped our friendship is the fact that we both shared the loss of our fathers at very early ages. So would you like to tell us a little bit about your dad and your story and how that shaped you?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And once again, thank you for having me. Talking about my mother's death, which we'll do later, is more recent. But unfortunately, like you, I lost my father as a child, even younger than you. I was 8 years old. My father kissed me goodnight one night to go out for dinner with my mother. He went out with his aunt, who was in from Chicago, and the next morning I was told that my father had been taken away by an ambulance and that he was sick and that he was in hospital. And unbeknownst to me, after being sent on that day to play with my friends at a summer school event, I went to summer school, came back, and my neighbors picked me up from the bus stop and took me back to their house. And I had an experience that I think is appropriate for this show, so I'm going to give it to you. I don't tell everyone this, but you and I have had this discussion. They took me back to the house and I stayed the night. And we'd done that very often. It was my next door neighbors. So my brother and I had spent a lot of time at their house and felt very comfortable that my mommy was with my daddy in the hospital and that they were taking care of us until she could see us tomorrow morning. And that was what I was told. And at 8 years old and my brother was 6, I questioned nothing.
Right.
And I even remember that we had ice cream and s'mores, and it was a fun evening.
Sure.
But I went to bed that night, and as I was going to sleep, I actually saw, which I didn't quite understand until later, my father standing at the bottom of my bed. And it was my first experience of spirit and of actually having the experience of not an out-of-body experience, a truly deep understanding that there was a separation, because he said to me, if you ever need me, you just have to ask for me, but I won't be coming back. And I didn't know what that meant until the next morning, when my mother told me that he had passed away. And when she told me he'd died, I got very adult at the age of 8, got a very large lump in my throat, and asked if I could leave. And when I left, after she hugged me and cried all over me and my brother, I went back to my neighbors and I said to them these words, and this is all I remember. My daddy is not in the hospital, and he's not home. He's in heaven with God. Wow. And at that moment, I knew that there was a separation between the physical form and the spiritual form. And that was the beginning of a very traumatic and very emotional time in my life that left me bereaved for most of my life around the loss of a father. And in addition, my mother was British, so she took us back to England. And we had a lot of back and forth to England until she became comfortable, and that was about 1.5 years. So my real deep grieving didn't start, I don't believe, until I was much older, when I could finally go, oh, I get it. He's not coming back, I'm not going back there, and I lost everything and had to rebuild myself.
Well, thanks for sharing that, and I think there's so much in what you shared. One is that sense of knowing that is not unusual for children or others, and there's the other piece of knowing life is forever changed, and that your childhood as it once was is now over. Yeah. That things will never be the same.
Never.
And that excusing and that desire to now step up and take care of things is very, very common, particularly with women who have lost their fathers. I've talked to many women. I've been interested in this. And as the remaining parent then becomes, at least in my view, your sole focus.
Yeah.
because if something happens to them, who's going to take care of us now? So there's this relationship gets more intense, and there's the dynamic of the parent grieving, and we don't know about our own grief, much less what they're going
Exactly.
through, which is totally different. So it is, I think, hopefully somewhat different for children than the years and years and years ago when we dealt with it. But I think that phenomena of feeling responsible in some way.
I think that's very true. I didn't only feel responsible for my mother, which continued through my
Right.
life, and we'll talk about her and our relationship, which was quite dynamic and beautiful and wonderful, and
Right.
I'm very grateful for, but I also had it with my brother. So in a way, a triangle was created, both healthy and dysfunctional. That when you lose one of the parents and the other one's there, number one, you pray every single time you leave them or they leave you that they're going to come back, because in my
Right.
case, I didn't even go to my father's funeral, because in those days, in the late 50s, their belief was that it was too traumatic for a child. But because of that, I never really saw where he was buried until after it was covered, and
Right.
that was very hard, and my brother the same. So my relationship with my younger brother became even more intense, and through life we have had a bond unlike most children, I believe.
Well, you have a shared trauma.
Correct.
And when children have shared trauma, particularly around parents, there is usually some kind of caregiving bond that occurs.
Yep.
And I think it's almost like unconscious that well, we've got each other and mom, but we've got each other.
Yep.
So I appreciated what you said, that losing your father at such an early age had your bond with your mother be even more intense. And you said you cared for her, and you cared for her throughout her life.
Mm-hmm.
And so tell me about Mama She, as we all called her, moving in with your life, in your home at that stage. How was that for her, and then how did that change as she started to decline in her health?
Okay. So Mama She was Mama She to dozens of women.
Right.
In fact, I remember on her 90th birthday telling all of you that you were going to have to help me as she was getting older. And I got a lot of support. Mama She was a very self-sufficient woman. Worked her whole life, took care of her kids, ended up retiring when my husband and I and our then 6-year-old moved to Santa Barbara. And she didn't want to live in Los Angeles anymore, and we invited her to come up and found a place that we felt she could live with us. Ended up losing that place for a number of reasons and moving into another place and making it available to her to have her own apartment. That was 34 years before she passed. So for 34 years, my amazing husband, Harry, and my son, Adam, who adored his grandmother more than life itself. In fact, I think I was secondary. I may have birthed him, but the reality is that Mama She was his nanny. Nanny She was the most important person in his life. And so what happened was that in the beginning, she was incredibly self-sufficient, and we didn't have any overlap except for dinner a few nights a week, and we
Right.
would go to events together and things. And then she started declining. So at 80, she decided to go and have hip surgery. And she was excited about it because she was becoming immobile. And she had the surgery, and unfortunately, it was a surgery that went wrong. Not
Right.
because of the surgeon, but because the company that made the hip
Right. Was defective.
was
parts.
defective. So she never could really walk properly after that. She had to be on a cane and then finally on a walker. And that was frustrating to her. But once again, like a champ, she got through it and even went for therapy and beat up couches thinking that it was the company, and released a lot of that anger. But for the next 10 years, it became frustrating for her, though she continued her life.
She was very involved.
Very involved, including at 80 starting a art gallery and with 12 other women, and not giving up all of the accounting until she was 90.
Right.
So we're now at 90. 90, she's starting to get a little diminished, and that's when the downhill started. She had 3 major accidents within a 2.5-year period. Broke 4 ribs, pierced her lung, went through all of that. That was very traumatic. and then coming back from that, she didn't want to go into any rehab. She didn't want to go, and her fear really was to be, one, a burden to me, but really truthfully was to be in a facility. She really was against facilities.
So a couple of things. I mean, one of the things that's what a lot of adults with aging parents are facing is this thing about where my life is versus where my parents' life is. People are all over the country, and what you recreated was this extended family, the way we used to live, where it was generational, and you still did that. When your mother when you could start to see the decline, what impact did that have on you? Did you think, oh my gosh, she's starting to die? Did that become present? Did you think about it at all, or was it just like, well, she's just declining, but she's good? Was there any part of you that's saying, uh-oh?
Well, I think, frankly, because of my experience of death is always around.
That's
so,
right. You had more awareness than most.
Yeah. So I was aware that she would die, and that one day she would die, and so we actually talked about it. My mother and I had a very interesting relationship in as much as we were really friends, on top of mother-daughter. And by the end, if anyone who's going through this experience of having an aging parent with them, you realize you become the parent. And
absolutely,
how you become that parent is really interesting. So I think the initial part of that for me was my brother and my son and my husband got on my case about her driving. And it was after her hip surgery, and I should be the one to tell her she can't drive anymore. And I thought, oh my God, how do I do that? How do I tell my mother what she can do and what she can't do? We've never had that relationship. And that was I guess, the beginning of taking on that position. And what I did, and this kind of explains how we went through death also, was I went in and I sat down with her and I said, Adam and Harry and Brian have asked me to talk to you. They really feel that you have to stop driving, that they're seeing a decline in your ability, and there had just been an accident of an elderly man who'd hit a whole group of people and killed in Santa Monica.
Yes.
So they were freaking out that was going to happen, and she was going to end her life in, like literally in jail. Right. So I used that, and her first comment was, well, why aren't they sitting here telling me this?
Well, that was my thought too. That they made you the deliverer. You're the messenger.
I was always the one who, and till the end, I was the one. And so I said, because they don't have the guts, and because they felt I could do it in a softer way, and you would hear me. And she said, well, I don't agree. And I said, I know you don't agree, but now as the soft, loving daughter, I'm going to tell you they're right, and you need to stop driving. And whatever that takes, I will help you with it. And she went, well, I can't talk to you right now about this. Go away. Leave me alone. I went, okie dokie, we'll do that. And I left her alone. And I went back about half an hour later and I said, are you ready to talk? She said, yes. And she said, my darling, I gave birth to you, and the day that I gave birth to you, I held you in my hands. I looked into your face and I swore to you that I would never do anything that would cause you pain. This is causing you pain. I will stop driving.
Wow.
And this is what I will do. I need you to take me to these classes that I'm going to. I'll call Easy Lift, which is the local,
So she laid out the course. So
in half an hour, she had taken her life back. She made a choice, and she gave me the gift of not feeling as if I was taking it away, but she was making a deal. And that deal lasted until she died. And that deal was perfection, because we found a driver who would come for her. I mean, now I think we would use Lyft or Uber, but at the time we didn't have it. And so she was self-sufficient even at that time. But that became the structure by which the dying fit in.
Right. So the thing too that I'm sure there's people that are watching the show going, I can't talk to my parents about any of this stuff. And that's the great fear. In an odd way, the fact that you both experienced, or you all experienced, this early death sort of made that segue. And I just think that do you have any words of encouragement for people who are children of adults that may not have as smooth of a relationship, but how do you, you know, how
My
do you,
brother didn't. My
Your brother did not,
didn't. So
right.
I watched it, and Grace did come in the end. What I really think for all parents, being a parent and a grandparent myself, is that honestly what you want for your children is that you aren't a burden and that you give them joy and not pain. And I believe that if given those choices and actually expressed by the person who's caring for the elder, saying, this is really painful for me, this is really difficult. When I took the keys away from her, I cried.
Sure.
I think that showing the humanity of your pain in doing any of it allows them to realize that it is not something you're doing against them. You're doing it out of love and for them. And that's my real belief about the aging process in general, is by understanding that those who love you are doing what they're doing for you, not against you, makes you feel a little softer to that experience. And that's how I talk to my friends who are going through more difficult ways.
Well, what's interesting about this is that in a previous show, Jenny Parks, who also was present at your mom's passing, talked about the loving, and that the best thing you can do for your children as a parent is to get everything together, do those things that you need to do. And I wondered, because you use that linchpin, or as your mom's health continued to shift, and also the blessing of your mother was that her memory was solid.
Yeah.
That everyone doesn't always have
No.
that, but she was sharp till the end.
Yeah.
How did you, or did you use some of this to create what you did for her? I mean, you worked with her to create her funeral and all of that. So could you
Yeah.
tell us how that came about and what the product was and how
Absolutely.
that impacted you when she did finally pass?
Sure, be happy to. So interesting. My mother was very spiritual in her being. She was a very kind and gentle and giving and strong and all of those things. An amazing, complete human. She really was.
Yeah, she was.
But she really didn't believe in religion. She was raised in England, so there was Christianity. My father was Jewish, so I was raised in both. But she had a really strong belief about religion, about the actual formation of the religion. And that was that religion was created by men to control women, money, power, and real estate, and had nothing to do with a higher power, which there was a God, but that the religious aspect of it to her was the thing that caused wars. I mean, she had no, so therefore she said to me, I don't want a religious person to do my funeral. You and Brian will have to do it. Now, to be told that as a child is not a comfortable situation.
Oh, she told you that when you were a child?
No, I mean her
Yeah,
child.
oh,
No,
as
as
her
an adult.
child. I was going to say.
As an
okay.
adult. But I would say, you know, by the time she had her surgery at 80, she was
Right.
talking this way. So how was I going to have a service when I was going to be mourning, no matter what age she was when she died, no
course,
matter what
it's
I
your
went
mother.
through? It's my mother, right? So I had to think very seriously about it. So I said, well, so what do you want me to do? And she said, you'll decide what to do. And I said, well, will you help me? And she goes, no, I'm not dying yet. So I thought, well, what do I do? So what I did was, I asked her, I gave her a book, and I said, Mama, you always love Shakespeare, poetry, quotes. You give them to me all the time. So that your great-grandchildren, who will never meet you, can have your quotes and your wisdom, would you write them in a book?
So you kind of tricked her into making a legacy present for the future, which you then turned into her funeral.
Correct. And then I would go to funerals and say, what do you think of this? And she'd read it and she'd go, that's perfect. I'd love that. Oh, great. Okay, we'll do that. So over time, literally over 10 years, which some people thought was a little gory and weird of me to be doing this, but for me, it made the day that she passed very easy, and I knew me. So
Yeah.
I can't say that that's true for everyone. Some people, you know, don't believe in choosing the casket before they're gone. I personally don't have that hang up, so it was easy for me. And I wrote all of those things and started literally making her book that was going to be
So, yeah.
used.
Well, you know, it's not unlike what the newspapers do with famous people and that type of thing. And I do recall, because of our friendship, you talking about, again, using your anticipated pain as a leverage, not in a manipulative way, but just saying, Mom, I'm not going to be able to do this when the time comes, so I want to do it now. I want to, just watching the time, I want to talk about, you said you wanted to talk about what happened the night before she died, and then I'd like to share when she died and the ceremony, because people don't realize that when someone dies, the mortuary doesn't have to take the person away immediately. So could you just share a little bit about the night before?
Be happy to. So my neighbor across the street is a Unitarian minister, works at the hospital, and was beloved by my mother, even though she was a religious person. She didn't see her that way. And so I had actually talked to my mother prior to that about when she died, would it be okay if Melita did her funeral? And she said yes, because she really had a personal relationship.
Right.
So the morning before she died, I knew she was dying. It was obvious. She was on 100% oxygen. She was unable to get out of bed for more than 10 minutes. She would do it because she was determined every day she was going to get out of bed, but she really hadn't been moving at all for 4 days.
Right.
She hadn't eaten anything.
Right.
And so the morning before her death, I told Melita I thought she was dying. So Melita said, could I come and see her? I said, well, she's not seeing anyone, but you she would see. So that afternoon, I went out to the market and came home about 5:30. It was in February, so it was dark outside. And I walked in, and the lights were on in my mother's living room, so I thought it was my husband there. And I walked into the living room, and my mother was standing in her little kitchenette making porridge. And I go, Mama, what are you doing? And she says, I'm hungry. I said, well, you haven't eaten in 4 days. That would be the reason, darling. I said, wouldn't you like to sit down? She says, no, I'm making porridge with brown sugar and raisins and a little soy milk, dear. And I went, that's wonderful, Mom. Why don't you sit down and I'll bring it to you? At which point, the doorbell rings and it's Melita. And she comes in and sees my mother standing there, and I said, have a seat, Mom. Melita's come to talk to you. And it was that moment that people talk about, that last hurrah where people who are dying did that energy and talked to Melita, and they had a wonderful 15-minute conversation, and then Melita left. And I thought I was going insane. I thought, I'm telling a woman she's going to die, and she's up making porridge. So that was the prior night.
Right. And then
one thing about that, Mom had a thing on her neck to hit
Lifeline.
Lifeline. She would never take it off, even though she was on hospice for almost 3 months. And I said, Mama, take it off. You're in bed. I'll take care of you. And she goes, no, I still feel self-sufficient. If I need anyone and you're not here, I can push it. Okay. After she died, I found her lifeline hanging on the kitchenette door.
So there was a part of her that knew. So let's just, in the little bit of time we have left, let's talk about her passing and the ceremony, which I have to say I was grateful to be a part of. But talk about how you said goodbye to your mother and what that was like.
Well, the first saying goodbye was the moment she died, and I was sitting next to her, and she stopped breathing, and I stopped the oxygen, and I said, you're relaxed, Ma. And then I kissed her, and then I listened to her last 5 heartbeats. And that, for me, for anyone who's listening and who feels they need an ending, was the greatest ending. Because my comment was, when I kissed her, was, Mama, yours was the first heartbeat I ever heard, and I heard your last.
Oh.
And it felt like a cycle was
It is
completed,
a life cycle, absolutely.
right? It was completed. So the completion of our relationship happened then. And then the completion of her body.
No, the completion of your physical relationship ended then.
Right. That's what I mean. I mean, that completion of mother-child coming out of her womb in the physical world.
Got it.
Very cool. If anyone can do that, just listen to those last heartbeats and realize that you've been given this incredible gift. So that was one thing. And then the next morning, so she died at about 10:30 at night. I called Jennifer, and Jenny called me, spoke to me.
That was the mortuary.
The mortuary, and she said, do you want me to come and get the body? I said, no, she's comfortable. Her cat's sitting on her lap. She's in her bed. It's the middle of the night. No, you don't have to come. What about tomorrow morning? She says, what time would be good? I said, about 9. She said, fine, I'll be there at 9. So I let her sleep in her bed. I went in the morning. I talked to her. I had my conversation with her. And then, At 9 o'clock, or at about 8:45, my dear friend Arlene arrived on my doorstep and said, "I thought you might need me. I'm here." And then Jenny arrived, and then Melita arrived. And all of a sudden, there were 4 of us on each corner of this woman. And Jenny had brought the shroud, and had also brought the lavender water. And we did the whole ceremony that's done with lavender water, which you might know the words of.
Yeah, well, and it's the blessing of the body. And there's versions, but it's the beautiful part, and I think, is the way you approached her death and the normalcy of it, and the body, how we honored the body temple.
We did.
We did.
We honored every part of her from her head to her toes. And I think my greatest moment was knowing that this woman, who had been a widow from the time she was 38, and who came from a widow and 5 generations of widows, I stood at the end of her bed as the matriarch of my family with 3 other women, and we blessed her. And it was truly one of the greatest moments that I could have wished for, because I felt complete, and I felt honoring, and I felt at peace.
Well, Judi, I really appreciate you sharing this. And there's so much more about this, because when we lose the second parent, there's an issue for us. I mean, because now we're alone in the world. And at the same time, losing a first parent so early, it does shape, if we allow it, the way we hold it. It just was lovely that you shared all that with us. And I appreciate being your friend and having been there and blessing your mom and your family, which makes it all worthwhile. The cycle of life's complete. So thank you so much. And if you'd like to put Mama She's name in our book of Living Love, please do so. And for those of you who are watching at home, you can go to the website www.dyingingrace. You can add your own name to a loved one's name in the book of Living Love. You can also watch previous shows at dyingingrace.com. We want to thank SBTV and our crew, Elliot Jacobson, Ken Baxter, Mike Nicholson, and my guest once again, Judi Weisbart. Thank you so much.